Thank you all for coming. I'm Lisa Fox Martin, and on behalf of the Board of Trustees of the Thomas Cole National Historic Site, I welcome you to our fourth and last of the Salon series. This winter season, we've had a wonderful season. How many of you have been to previous salons this year, just this year? Yay! We have quite a great repeating following. But at any rate, I'd like to introduce Betsy Jacks, our executive director, who will give you more information about what's coming up after we conclude this Salon series. We have more things coming up. And thank you again for coming. And we have a wonderful talk today. I know it's going to be very exciting. So thanks.
Hi, I'm Betsy Jacks. I'm Executive Director of the Thomas Cole National Historic Site. Thank you, Lisa, for introducing us today. And thank you all for coming. This is the last one of our 2018 Sunday Salons. And I'd like to thank the people who made this series possible, Jim and Diane Lewis, who are sitting here today, and David and Laura Gray, as well as the New York State Council on the Arts. So thank them very much for this series, which is always popular, and we have really loved having it. This is our 15th year of Sunday Salons, so it's kind of caught on, I think. And so I want to let you know about the very next thing that's going to happen in this room. After we clear out all the chairs, this is going to turn into a gallery, and in will come the crates, and on the walls, which we have painted this lovely dark forest green, will be our exhibition, which is Picturesque and Sublime. And with us today is one of the 5-member curatorial team that put together that exhibition, this dream team, I like to call it, with these incredible scholars from Yale, and we are going to hear more about that from Sophie. So the opening for that exhibition is on April 28th, and everyone's invited, so please all come. And then it will be up until the first week of November. So you'll have lots of time to come, bring friends, etc. So our speaker today is Sophie Linford, and she is the doctoral candidate in the history of art at Yale University. And she is also the Douglas Foundation Fellow in the American Wing at the Met. So she gets to be at the Yale and at the Met. It's pretty good. She is currently doing her dissertation on the American pre-Raphaelites. And she tells me that their claim to fame is that they rejected Thomas Cole and the Hudson River School. So she also contributed to the Thomas Cole exhibition that is on view at the Met right now. And if any of you have not seen that show, run, don't walk to the Met. It's up on view until May 13th, but it is a beautiful exhibition on Thomas Cole. And that show will then travel to London, so we'll get to see what the Brits think about their British-born American artist. So I'm so pleased that Sophie could be here today. She is a star, and we look forward to seeing all the wonderful things she does in her career. And we can always say that she started here, or something like that. So please welcome Sophie.
I have to lower this a bit. Can you all hear me? And I know that I'm supposed to check to make sure the audio is good. I'm getting the nod. Okay, thank you so much, Betsy, for that generous introduction. It's been so wonderful getting to know Betsy and her amazing team here over the past 2 years as we've planned our Picturesque and Sublime exhibition that will open here in just 3 weeks from yesterday. And I also would like to thank the Cole House trustee, Warner Shook, and Frank Swim for hosting us for lunch today. It was delicious, and they made an entirely gluten-free meal for me. So I'm feeling real good right now. And I also want to thank Lisa and Jennifer, Heather, and Eve for so skillfully organizing this. This has been one of the most well-executed talks. I hope that I can finish that out. It's a real honor to share with you today the research that I undertook for the exhibition that will open here shortly. And at the Sunday salons over the past few weeks, you've seen my colleagues at Yale and the Met talk about these different aspects of Thomas Cole's story and his narrative. This is the year of Cole, his 200th anniversary since he arrived. They've really focused on paintings and works on paper, these sort of British paintings and works on paper that Cole saw, across the pond. And today I want to talk about Cole's relationship with another British-born artist named William Guy Wall, but William Guy Wall was in the US, and so I want to talk about this very distinct US influence. And I want to talk about the legacy of Cole and Wall's relationship that we can see in Cole's early works of the Catskill region. So I'm going to start with this painting, which is of an area well known to many of you. This is one of Cole's most celebrated early paintings, which he originally painted in 1825, and he titled his canvas Catskill Upper Fall Catskill Mountains, which is a different title than you see on the screen, and I'm going to tell you why. So the artist John Trumbull famously saw the 1825 painting in William Coleman's shop window in New York City in 1825, and this display has long been regarded as having launched Cole's career. And so Cole's original composition was owned by Trumbull, and it's now lost. So Cole painted a second version that he named Catskill Falls in 1826, and that's a copy of his original that he'd painted the year before. And he painted this for his patron, Daniel Wadsworth. And that's now in the collection of the Wadsworth Athenaeum in Hartford, Connecticut. It stayed in the family all of these years. So, standing at the cavern's edge, the viewer confronts the plunging waters of Catskill Falls. There splash a burst of white impasto. In the background are the Catskill Mountains, their autumn hillsides flecked with auburn, crimson, and umber. Above, mauve clouds threaten to drench the Native American figure perched on the outcropping at the base of the cascade. This figure is dwarfed by the immensity that surrounds him. The height of the falls, the span of the cavern, and the altitude of the mountains testify to man's insignificance in the face of monumental nature. So this description applies not only to Cole's painting, but to another canvas executed during the same period. The work on the right is William Guy Wall's Catskill Falls on the Catskill Mountains, taken from under the cavern, which is dated 1826 to 1827. Although they feature identical landscapes, the works diverge in several respects, most notably in the human agents pictured. Cole's figure is Native American, suggesting we have stumbled upon a Catskill of the past. Wall inserts fashionably dressed Europeans, locating the scene in the artist's present, the moment the Hudson Valley emerged as a center for tourism. It was these paintings and their distinctive treatments of the same scene that were likely the works the American author James Kirk Paulding had in mind when he wrote in 1828, quote, "Messrs. Wall and Cole, two fine artists, admirable in their different, we might almost say opposite styles, have illustrated the scenery of the Catskill by more than one picture of singular excellence." Paulding went on to promote the nascent genre of American landscape painting, of which Cole and Wall were among the earliest practitioners. Quote, "We should like to see such pictures gracing the drawing rooms of the wealthy, in the place of that vulgar, tasteless, and inelegant accumulation of gilded finery, which costs more than a dozen fine landscapes." Of the two artists that Paulding championed, Cole, long identified as the founder of the American School of Landscape Painting, has enjoyed a wider reputation. William Guy Wall, who was 8 years Cole's junior, is largely a forgotten figure. Paulding's observation reveals that, though recognized as different, even opposite, Cole and Wall held equal standing in the estimation of their contemporaries. Wall is today known for the popularity of the Hudson River Portfolio, published between 1825 1821 and 1825, as a volume of 20 aquatints after Wall's original watercolors. This slide shows a bound copy of the portfolio, along with a selection of the 20 aquatints that the volume comprises. Aquatint is a printmaking technique that became popular in Britain in the late 18th century. It's a variant of etching. Aquatint was frequently the medium of choice to translate watercolors into reproducible prints because the technique allowed for the replication of tonal areas as opposed to the cross-hatched lines that were required in an engraving. Aquatint was better able to represent the broad liquid gestures of watercolor. And on this slide, I've juxtaposed close-up details of an aquatint print versus an engraving, so you can see how the two techniques produce such visually distinct prints. And both of these prints will be in our exhibition in 3 weeks, so you can see them in person then. There are very few complete extant editions of the Hudson River Portfolio. This picture shows the Met's copy currently on view in their Thomas Cole exhibition, and the lovely Shannon Vittoria of the Met, who spoke here in February, kindly modeled for me, so I could give you a sense of how large this book is. I'm very pleased to announce that Yale's complete copy of the Hudson River Portfolio will be on view here in this room in just 3 weeks. I might say that a lot over the course of this. I'm excited. So William Guy Wall was a number of artists trained in Britain who sought greater opportunity in the United States in the early years of the 19th century. Besides the place and date of Wall's birth in Ireland, little is known of the artist before he landed in New York in 1818, just 2 months after Cole's arrival in Philadelphia. Whether Wall was trained in Ireland or England has not been confirmed, but scholars believe that the advanced skill in watercolor techniques he displayed when he began painting in New York demonstrates some degree of formal art education. After just 2 years in New York, Wall was hired by the publisher Henry McGarry to paint a group of watercolors of picturesque landscapes along the Hudson River, after which a volume of aquatints would be produced. Titled the Hudson River Portfolio, the project combined the talents of 3 recent British immigrants. Wall was joined by John Hill, a master engraver whose skills in aquatint were considered unrivaled in North America. Hill executed hand-colored aquatints after each of Wall's 20 original watercolors. John Agg, an English poet and novelist who had accompanied Wall on the sketching tour up the Hudson, supplied each print with a textual description of the scene represented by Wall. In the bound portfolio, each of Agg's descriptions faces its corresponding aquatint. Historians of American art have long recognized Wall and his Hudson River Portfolio as inspiring a taste for landscape in this country and for importing the visual vocabulary, well known in Britain and in Europe, of the picturesque and the sublime. The 2 plates from the portfolio that you see on the screen exemplify these 2 aesthetic styles and demonstrate Wall's ability to move easily between the rival concepts. On the left, in view near Fort Miller, Wall presents a calm and pleasing vista that typified a picturesque landscape. Wall places a large tree at the left border that frames the composition and guides the viewer's eye to the tranquil body of water at the image's center. In the distance, mountains overlap the horizon line. We'll see Wall repeat this pictorial formula across many plates in the portfolio. However, as we can see in Hadley's Falls on the right, Wall is also comfortable with the hallmarks of the sublime, the aesthetic category rooted in experiences of fear and danger associated with the grandeur and perils of the natural world. Previous interpretations of Wall's work have identified his role principally as laying the foundation from which Cole, an artist of true romantic genius, could transcend earlier topographic traditions in picturing the American Northeast. But today, I would like to argue for a different reading of Cole's and Wall's connection. If we look closely at both artists' early ventures, we can discern a far more reciprocal relationship between the 2 painters, characterized by multiple moments of exchange in which homelands, patrons, subjects, and landscapes are shared. Scrutinizing the personal and artistic relationship between Cole and Wall allows us to reconstruct the process by which leading practitioners of the American landscape genre in the 1820s responded to the nation's economic and political flux. Cole and Wall were artistic peers in a common enterprise. They both struggled against the strictures of British landscape painting and searched for pictorial strategies responsive to a country that, though still predominantly rural, was quickly urbanizing. The most salient contrasts between Cole's and Wall's work of the 1820s lie in the artists' differing stances toward nature, exemplified by the distinct figures centrally placed in their renditions of Catterskill Falls. Throughout the decade, Wall produced landscape scenes in which man had visibly intervened. In the Hudson River Portfolio, waterfalls are almost always pictured with a mill perched atop the cascade, harnessing the power derived from the drop. These plates are also peopled with elegantly attired individuals, tourists who are arriving upstate in droves to experience the sights of the Hudson Valley, made famous in part by Wall's own images. Cole, while representing many of the same locales, omitted such traces of the area's commerce, including the leisure industry. In Catterskill Falls, for example, he adopted a unique vantage point that allowed him to render the falls without portraying the tourist's viewing platform at the summit, which he did include in this pencil sketch of the falls that he executed at the same time, and which Thomas Hilson made the subject of his drawing of the site. Cole's decision to eliminate evidence of such activity from his finished paintings was just one of many over the course of a career in which Cole's aesthetic choices repeatedly demonstrate his preference for untamed nature over the domesticated, even commercialized landscapes celebrated by Wall. The artist's distinct aesthetic sympathies inaugurated a conflict that would play out in the works of American landscape painters for decades. So prior to the research we undertook for the upcoming exhibition, the contents of the Hudson River Portfolio had never been analyzed fully. Because the plates from the volume were often acquired individually rather than as a complete set, most of its aquatints have been preserved without their accompanying letterpress, divorcing the images from the explanatory context in which Wall anticipated they would resonate. Examined without the prose composed to complement each plate, the images in the Hudson River Portfolio appear as rather formulaic, picturesque presentations of 20 sites along the Hudson from New York City to the Adirondacks. However, when the images are paired with their associated verbal description and instruction, the portfolio emerges as a tribute to the industrialization and commercialization of the Hudson Valley, to its emerging tourist industry, and to a projection of the United States as a modern commercial power. The portfolio was the second publication in the United States of large colored landscapes. The first was titled Picturesque Views of American Scenery, which appeared in 1820. These projects followed the example of countless prototypes circulating in England, where illustrated travelogues and printed collections of noteworthy sites, both natural and architectural, were mainstays of the country's publishing industry, which was capitalizing on the burgeoning enthusiasm for travel and tourism. Collectible prints after famous artists further heightened interest in the medium. Paul Sandby's Views in Wales is just one example that the early American versions certainly emulated, and this volume will also be in our show. The Hudson River Portfolio was designed to rival these British models in quality and content. To build excitement for the portfolio's imminent distribution, its publisher issued advertisements that announced, quote, "The Hudson River Portfolio will be printed on paper expressly made for the purpose, and on which neither labor nor expense has been spared to render it equal to any European." The portfolio was considered an artistic and commercial success, with John Hill producing individual prints for over 10 years to keep up with a consistent demand. Its long life guaranteed the work a legacy in the history of both prints and landscape imagery in America. Wall's images reveal a pride in his adopted homeland's industrializing landscapes and in topography shaped by human endeavor, not unlike the sense of patriotic praise found in British examples of similar subjects. In 1816, for example, the British painter J.M.W. Turner made the industrial and economic prosperity of Leeds, a city in the north of England, the subject of a watercolor that was later popularized as a lithograph. In this work, Turner celebrated the city's industrialized environment and its laboring citizens. Flax mills, pottery kilns, and an oil and mustard factory dominate the skyline. The foreground is populated by mill workers, milk carriers, a butcher, and textile workers. Wall subjects the American landscape to the same treatment. A reading of the portfolio yields a striking number of pictorial and textual references to specific industries. The plates picture saw, carding, grist, and bolting mills, sites important to the area's lumber industry and important agricultural landscapes. The accompanying text praises the overall prosperity of the region's commerce, most of it stemming from exploitation of natural resources, such as water, wood, and stone. To represent the region's commercialization, the portfolio deploys a variety of visual and textual strategies. In Little Falls at Lucerne, the portfolio's first plate, Wall's commentary on the private enterprise developing in this corner of the Adirondacks is formally expressed through the juxtaposition of picturesque and industrial elements. Wall places two sawmills at the immediate center of the composition, perched atop the rushing waters of what is today known as Rockwell's Falls. Just to the left of the mills, on the hill and slightly further into the distance, is a large white house, and at the extreme left of the composition is another homestead. Although the text informs the reader that the gray edifices are sawmills, without this instruction, viewers may be unaware of their purpose in the production of lumber, assuming instead that they form a group of pleasant residential buildings. Further, the picturesque formula to which the scene conforms distracts viewers from the industrial intervention at the image's center. Wall ably employs the conventions of the picturesque. The viewer's eye is guided through the receding space of the picture, emphasized by the outcropping of rock in the foreground upon which an intrepid figure balances, and the rocky diagonal twinned by the river's rushing waters. Yet when the question of industry is introduced, it becomes clear that the picturesque elements function to direct the viewer's gaze toward the commercial enterprise on display. The slant of the promontory, the overlapping diagonals of the cascade, and the angling of the large tree at the right border all draw our attention to the falls powering the mills. In Little Falls at Lucerne, Wall finds scenic appeal in economic promise. But compositional unity of the commercial and the picturesque does not extend to every plate in the portfolio. There's no visual reference to industry in the portfolio's 11th plate, Troy from Mount Ida, which appears to be a straightforward topographical rendering of a serene river town. The accompanying textual explanation, however, tells a different story. It reads, quote, "This city was first laid out in 1787. The amazing change which has been subsequently wrought is almost as much to be attributed to the industry and enterprise of its inhabitants as to the inimitable advantages of its situation. From this place, a number of sloops and smaller vessels are continually employed in the conveyance of articles of merchandise up and down the Hudson. It is no unusual thing to see the river almost entirely covered with immense rafts, which are brought down in order to find a market for lumber at Albany." End quote. But where are the sloops, vessels, and immense rafts in Wall's image? Their absence may be explained by changes in the region's commercial fortunes that took place during and immediately following Wall's trip up the Hudson. The most significant was the opening of the Erie Canal in 1825, when Troy was transformed from a farming town into a flourishing port city. Due to its proximity to the junction of the canal and the Hudson, Troy became a hub for the trade and transport that the portfolio's text describes. The text records the territory's metamorphosis, but the image appears to depict Troy in an earlier era. Such inconsistencies between text and image represent more than conflicting interpretations of author and artist. Wall's aesthetic decisions throughout the portfolio to incorporate cryptic references to the area's industry while presenting an otherwise picturesque scene indicate he was well aware of the new enterprise springing up in the Hudson Valley: tourism. Before the canal opened, the middle Hudson Valley, in particular Greene County, which you all know includes Catskill, had been the center of the region's wheat and flour industry. But the Erie Canal redirected that trade to farms in far western New York. Looking to replace the lost wheat and flour revenue, Greene County quickly reinvented itself as the center of New York State's nascent but lively business in landscape tourism. It began to market the natural environment, building hotels, viewing platforms, and hiking trails. Even a town like Troy, which remained a center of commerce, touted its picturesque riverbanks. This transformation is captured in Troy from Mount Ida and other plates in the portfolio, such as View Near Hudson. But Wall's role exceeded that of faithful recorder. In highlighting the scenic beauty of the Hudson, Wall positioned his prints to demonstrate the region's potential for tourism. With visual and verbal content that appealed to the industrialist and the naturalist, the Hudson River Portfolio was an astutely and diplomatically designed product. By the late 1820s, Cole and Wall were not only well acquainted, but were friends who saw each other weekly. Both artists had been founding members of New York's National Academy of Design in 1825, and in the fall of 1827, they were among a group of members who formed the Sketch Club, an exclusive coterie of, quote, artists, authors, men of science, and lovers of art that included such luminaries as the writer William Cullen Bryant and artists Asher B. Durand, Robert W. Weir, Samuel F. B. Morse, and Henry Inman. The members described their club as having been, quote, formed for the promotion of mutual intercourse and improvement of impromptu sketching, and the group met weekly at the homes of members. Attendance rarely exceeded 10 men, and the club's minutes reveal that for most of 1829, Cole and Wall attended regularly, each week sketching a subject selected by that meeting's host. The subjects could be general or thematic, such as a deserted village or the abduction, or culled from literary sources, such as Lord Byron's poem Dream. In March 1829, Wall, Cole, and their colleagues executed sketches based on Walter Scott's Elphin Page character from The Lay of the Last Minstrel, and the suite of sketches from that session survives in the collection of the Yale University Art Gallery, and a group of those images are on the screen. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Cole and Wall chose to illustrate their chosen vignette as primarily landscape scenes, while other members highlighted passages with human action. The minutes that were recorded at each meeting reveal that these gatherings frequently devolved into frivolity. On one occasion, shortly after Wall arrived with, quote, moonshine, the minutes read, Mr. Cole broached a new theory of the combustion of peanut shells, with Wall supporting Cole's notion, and Inman and Weir contending, on the other hand, that there are, in fact, no such things as peanut shells or peanuts. End quote. Don't try to understand. What was surely an inside joke in 1828 can probably only be understood in the midst of the group's late-night alcohol-fueled antics, which were fastidiously described in their minutes. Remember, these men were 25 years old, 28 years old. Although these young men probably did not expect their drunken records to be read aloud in a public forum, the Sketch Club minutes reveal the close bonds established in these gatherings. When Cole departed for his European sojourn in late 1829, Wall stopped attending meetings. As original members of the National Academy of Design, Cole and Wall had shown work alongside only 30 other artists in the Academy's inaugural exhibition in 1826. That was just 1 year after the final prints of the Hudson River Portfolio had been published, and of the two artists, Wall enjoyed a wider reputation. He exhibited 20 landscapes at the first Academy show, while Cole debuted 3. Jointly, they accounted for nearly 2/3 of the 36 landscapes on display. The very first published review of the National Academy admired Cole and Wall together. Quote, "Messrs. Wall, Cole, Evers, and others in the Department of Original Landscape are rivaling the artists of any part in the world." Given the various contexts in which Cole and Wall interacted in the late 1820s and early 1830s, their output during this time demands side-by-side consideration. A comparison of the paintings of Catterskill Falls each artist completed in 1826 and 1827 allows us to examine how Cole and Wall responded to each other's work and how their conflicting positions on industrialization were visualized. This juxtaposition also forces us to ask why two artists with similar backgrounds arrived at opposing outlooks. While scholars usually cite the popularity of the Hudson River Portfolio as one of several reasons Cole was attracted to the Hudson Valley, Wall's version of Catterskill Falls reveals that later in the decade, Wall himself was influenced by the work of the young upstart Cole. Although Wall may have alerted Cole to the Hudson Valley's aesthetic potential, Cole's first canvases of the Catskills had a reciprocal influence. Cole's work encouraged Wall to revisit the region, to try his hand at painting in oil, and to experiment with the more idiosyncratic compositions which were a departure from Wall's earlier schematic coastal profile views. It was during this period that both artists exhibited depictions of Catterskill Falls. Cole's and Wall's paintings of the falls incontrovertibly resemble each other. Cole's now lost 1825 version of the scene had been shown at the National Academy in 1826, and Wall's was exhibited there the following year. The works raise the question of a possible joint trip to the Catskills, or, given the two artists' participation in sketch club activities, a friendly competition to paint identical scenes. Each artist represents Catterskill Falls from inside the adjacent cavern. In both paintings, the grotto's vaulted ceiling connects with the convex curve of the rocky ground to create a tondo-like window through which the scene is viewed. Within this frame appears the first drop of Catterskill's two-step falls, which Cole depicted head-on in his Falls of Catterskill of 1826. In both Cole's and Wall's paintings, the Catskill Mountains rise in the distance and are topped with pendulous, rain-laden clouds. Both artists capture the scene in autumn, their full palette on display in the depiction of fall foliage. Yet the treatment of trees in their respective canvases betrays vastly different sensibilities in the apprehension of nature. The flora in Cole's painting is wild and undomesticated, a contrast to the manicured hillsides in Wall's rendition. Cole's rocks are craggier, his falls more aggressive, their splash more robust, and his clouds more ominous. Already Cole's landscape is permeated by hints of metaphor and allegory, symbolic treatments that were to dominate his canvases in the 1830s. This begs the question, why was Cole drawn to romantic representations of nature and Wall to the topographical? Given Cole's and Wall's similar biographies, they both grew up in Great Britain, immigrated to the United States in 1818, and took formative trips up the Hudson in the early 1820s, one might expect them to arrive at compatible positions on the treatment of the American landscape. Likely it was the parallels in the artists' two backgrounds that encouraged their friendship. However, distinct childhood experiences in England and Ireland may help to explain how the painters arrived at disparate interpretations of Catterskill Falls. The current exhibition on Cole at the Met persuasively argues that Cole's boyhood was marked by episodes that catalyzed an anti-industrial worldview. Cole was 11 years old when riots and arson associated with the Luddite movement took place in his hometown of Bolton. demonstrators protested against the use of machinery in the textile and weaving industries and demanded protections for manual workers who had devoted years to developing their craft. Cole's adolescence was also spent cultivating his interest in the Romantic poets, especially Shelley and Wordsworth, whose veneration of nature was tied directly to their condemnation of industry. Cole internalized themes articulated in Wordsworth's poem, The Excursion, in which he wrote of, quote, such outrage done to nature at social industry's command. The disquietude triggered by exploitative commercial enterprises that would ultimately lead Cole to produce some of the most vaunted works of his career, the Oxbow and his 5-part series, The Course of Empire, intended as admonitions and the perilous course of American expansion and domination and the pursuit of manifest destiny. Coming of age in Ireland, Wall developed an entirely different sensibility toward nature. The last decade of the 18th century and the early years of the 19th century, coinciding with Wall's boyhood and adolescence, were periods of volatility in Irish history. Although Ireland boasted many regions of spectacular natural beauty, the country's rural poverty was extreme by any standard. While there was certainly poverty throughout much of the English countryside, which was romanticized in the canvases of John Constable, European visitors to Ireland at the turn of the 19th century observed especially desperate indigence compared to the conditions elsewhere in Great Britain. While it would be reductive to assert that the poverty of Wall's homeland was the sole factor in engendering his sanguine view of industrial progress, upon his arrival in New York in 1818, Wall did not appear burdened by nostalgia for rural nature or an idyllic past. In fact, Wall's subsequent work appears to embrace the redemptive potential of industrialization. With mills, factories, abundant agriculture, and husbandry, the American landscape offered economic prosperity, whereas in Ireland it often promised destitution. Wall's view near Hudson included in the Hudson River Portfolio pictures an American rural town that is the beneficiary of such economic vibrancy. A turnpike, the Hudson River, and the Catskill Mountains are framed on either side by groups of picturesque trees. In addition to the turnpike, which not only facilitated the transport of goods, but also monetized regional travel by charging tolls, Wall incorporates other traces of the area's settlement, including a split-rail fence denoting private property, sailboats navigating the river, and, according to the portfolio's text, numerous and neat residences. Wall revisited a similar scene in oil toward the end of the 1820s, after he had come under the influence of coal. In Hudson River from West Point looking toward Mount Taurus, Wall introduces many of the signatures of habitation present in view near Hudson, but in his oil, each of these elements seems to have been refracted through a Colean prism. The road is more rudimentary, the fence more dilapidated, the sailboats less clearly articulated, the framing trees more tortured. Like the portfolio's Aquatints, Hudson River from West Point pictures a landscape that has recently been brought into cultivation, as the portfolio's text described view near Hudson. But in Wall's oil, each aspect is slightly rougher, rendered with more expressive, textured brushwork. During the same period, Cole painted view near the village of Catskill, only a short distance from Wall's view near Hudson. Cole's vantage point is on the western side of the Hudson River. He represents the Catskill Mountains from the town of Catskill. The body of water in the middle ground is Catskill Creek. Painted a year after Catterskill Falls, in which there is no indication of man's intrusion, view near the village of Catskill suggests the young Cole is now engaging incipient domestication as an appropriate subject for depiction. Cole makes visual reference to agriculture and husbandry, including sheep in the foreground, two figures, possibly farmers, in the middle ground, a single homestead across the creek, and smoke rising at the base of the mountains. But clearly this is not a landscape that has been under the yoke of man. Cole places two blasted trees in the foreground, their contorted trunks a reminder that nature can, at any moment, reassert itself, reclaiming its primal state from man's modest agricultural incursions. The figures that Cole and Wall insert into their twin paintings of Catterskill Falls settle any lingering question as to whether Cole preferred virgin nature to the developed Catskills pictured by Wall. The two artists place human agents on the same projecting rock at the lower center of their respective compositions. In both works, the figures confer a sense of scale to the nature that surrounds them, but they also operate as markers of time. Cole represents a lone Native American, carrying a bow and arrow and wearing a red garment and headdress with white feathers. Over the course of his career, Cole frequently included a single indigenous figure in an unsettled landscape, which he deployed as an iconographic code to communicate First Peoples' imminent annihilation in the face of American expansion, a trope that would reappear in literature and art over the course of the 19th century. Standing in the wilderness at the base of the cascade, the indigenous figure signals that we are viewing a version of Catterskill Falls lodged either in the past or in Cole's imagination. While sketching on site, however, Cole ignored what Wall spotlights: tourists at the base of the falls engaged in leisure activities. One of Wall's figures points to something beyond the frame in the direction of the falls. His gesture can be read as a reference to recent human intervention in the Catskills. Local resident and business owner Silas Scribner had dammed Lake Creek, the body of water that feeds the falls, and subsequently constructed a sawmill. Wall's pointing man may be explaining to his companions a fraught issue that was much discussed in the New York press in the 1820s. Quote, "This sawmill, we shrewdly suspect, had been erected for a purpose different from that of cutting boards," surmised William Stone in the New York Commercial Advertiser. Stone revealed that Scribner had marred a natural splendor for a different kind of financial gain. Quote, "The owner has dammed up the water so as to nearly destroy the beauty of the cascade at pleasure, and when visitors come, he lets off the waters as a matter of favor, and before they leave the spot, duns everyone to pay for it. This is selling water to good advantage." Given Wall's earlier praise of industrial activity in the Hudson River Portfolio, it is unlikely that the comparative trickle of Catterskill Falls in Wall's painting compared to the rush in Cole's is a rebuke of Scribner for his exploitative practice. Instead, it is a record of the falls on the day Wall visited, their surge contingent on the paying tourists the artist places at center stage. It was Cole who had explicitly registered his opinion of the damming enterprise at Catterskill Falls in a canvas of 1825, Lake with Dead Trees. In this work, Cole depicts South Lake, which is connected to the falls by Lake Creek. The dead trees that populate the shore are the skeletal remains of a recent flood caused by Scribner's dam, arboreal corpses of a human-made disaster. They speak to the peril that Cole saw in the mills cited on nearly every sublime waterfall in the region, threats that were invisible to Wall. Incisive critiques of industrialization, Cole's paintings have endured, enjoying a celebrated legacy, while Wall's have been relegated to forgotten collections of conventional picturesque views. But the two artists engaged in a common enterprise, developing the stylistic conventions foundational to the depiction of the American landscape. Cole's vision attempted to render the northeastern landscape as an Arcadia under siege without explicitly visualizing the sources of the threat, while Wall's was alert to the rapid advancement, if not encroachment, of commerce, industry, and tourism. Their visions, simultaneously distinct and intertwined, initiated a generative agon that would engage American landscape painters throughout much of the 19th century. Thank you.